Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, San Francisco's premier author interview program. Today is simply what I call a happy day because we're having a return engagement with an author whose book I much admire. The author's name is Nathaniel Philbrick. The title of the book, Mayflower, A Story of Courage, Community, and War. And it's now a trade paperback published by Penguin Books. Thanks for coming back.
It's really great to be back.
One of the things I saw in the press kit really caught my eye. It says on May the 18th, not too far down the trail, you are going to be in a place called Reading, Massachusetts, and you're going to be talking at the Parker Middle School. Are we going after the kids?
Well, I hope so. I hope they're there. I think there will be plenty of adults, but actually what I'm in the middle of right now is working on a version of Mayflower for middle school students.
What a great idea.
Yeah, I did a version of this for my earlier book, In the Heart of the Sea. It's called Revenge of the Whale, and I just love getting the letters I get from kids. I've also get emails from the teachers and who say, because of this book has cannibalism in it, it's the one thing we can get boys to read. So that's truly gratifying.
That certainly is. Anytime you can, never mind. Now, you also come by with a smaller paperback book called simply The Mayflower Papers, Selected Writings of Colonial New England, and this is actually contains the primary source.
Yeah, many
material.
Of them.
Many of them, not everything.
But the main narratives that I used in Mayflower are contained there, and it's edited with my father, Thomas Philbrick, who's a retired English professor with a specialty in editing documents such as this. So it's been really fun working with him.
That's not bad, huh?
No, it is. It's great.
Wow. And one of the interesting things about this material is at least two of the titles. One of the piece is called The Sovereignty and Goodness of God.
Right.
And by one Mary Rowlandson. And then Benjamin Church and Thomas Church, Thomas being son, and entertaining passages relating to Philip's war.
Right. And, that is...
And a bloody mess it is,
Right. And you have to realize in the this is a slightly different version of the word entertaining that we have. This is, interesting passages.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And, but it's...
Gripping.
But it also, and it tells a very disturbing story.
Yeah, it certainly does.
Yeah.
The book itself, Praise from Mayflower, it says here, selected as one of the New York Times Book Review's 10 Best Books of 2006, and it was on their bestseller list for 20 weeks plus, and is also named one of the best books of the year by Newsweek, the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, the Denver Post, the Christian Science Monitor Publishers Weekly, and BookSense, which is the bestseller list of the independent bookstores, and also named a book list editor's choice, which is great for the library market.
Oh, yeah, and libraries are very near and dear to any author's
This is like a triumphal tour we're on here. And one of the reasons that this book got all those honors and all those sales, it was well said by Jonathan Yardley of the Washington Post. We like our history sanitized, he writes, and theme-parked and self-congratulatory, not bloody and angry and unflattering. But if Mayflower achieves the wide readership it deserves, perhaps a few Americans will be moved to reconsider all that. And that's what happened.
Much to my amazement, yes.
Yeah. So that this is, this book has achieved a lot. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. No, it was a surprise.
Pleases me because I liked it a lot.
Well, I know you were on there very early, and I appreciate it because this is a dark story, and I had concerns, and it was also it's a regional story, and I wasn't sure how would this connect beyond New England, and it's been quite gratifying.
Yeah, the press release kind of talks about the darkness when they say neither Pilgrims nor Indians were wholly angelic nor rapacious, though there were plenty of examples of each. And the real men and women of the 17th century were too smart, generous, brave, greedy, in short, too human to behave so predictably. They lived together, not in an idyll of mutual support, but in a dynamic, often harrowing process of give and take. And that process of give and take is really what the book is all about.
It is, and I'm glad you said that, because I think a lot of people either focus on the Pilgrim story or the war story, and from my perspective, the really unknown important story is here what happens in between, because there is this half century of relatively peaceful coexistence between two very different people, and how did it work? And it was not a utopia. It took a lot of diplomacy, and diplomacy is not easy. It's frustrating. It involves peoples that don't necessarily like each other, don't necessarily understand each other. But
don't share the same religion, don't share the same culture, and on top of all that, don't talk the same language.
Right. And it comes down to personal relationships, and it's the leadership that then becomes the focus.
One of the things about Mayflower is that it's terribly well researched, and it will tell you, therefore, things about folks like Miles Standish that you've never heard before. Just stay tuned.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Mayflower is the book, a story of courage, community, and war. And it's really necessary when you say Mayflower to say that subtitle, because that's exactly the three main focuses of the book. The courage on both sides, the community on both sides, and the unfortunate war. The author is Nathaniel Philbrick. He's with us. The book is in trade paperback now, published by Penguin Books, and the New York Times book review said, a vivid and remarkably fresh retelling. Freshness comes in part by zeroing in on authentic details. Legitimizing the one-word title, Philbrick renders lively images of the emblematic ship, crew, passengers, and voyage. Philbrick has recast the Pilgrims for our age of searching and turmoil. He gives what a 21st century reader needs to find in the material perspectives of both the English Americans and the Native Americans, and we talked a little bit about that in the first segment. That there is a fantastic balance here that, in and of itself, is unexpected.
Oh, absolutely. And, this is the thing that surprised me with the story. With each segment of it, once you get involved in the original document, you lose perspective of where you're going. You're in the moment, and you say, how are they going to get out of this?
Yeah.
And that was a continual process in retelling this story.
Part of the authenticity of Mayflower, in my opinion, lies in your ability to give us in-depth portraits or in-depth experience of so many of the people that make up the story. I want to start with a relatively minor character that I just came across in my rereading for the interview, a fellow by the name of Thomas Morton.
Oh,
the
yes.
founder of Merrymount.
Thomas Morton. Oh, he is one of my favorite characters. He was the anti-pilgrim.
Yeah, he sure was.
Yes, he was not a Puritan separatist. He was gleefully a Church of England man who loved his classics and formed a settlement just to the north of Plymouth, where he thumbed his nose at the Pilgrims. Instead of building a fort, he built an 80-foot maypole, and he danced around the pole with his Native American friends, drinking booze and reading racy verse.
Most of the Native Americans were not wearing clothes.
Yes.
Which
well, he was
also very anti-pilgrim.
Right. And what drove the Pilgrims crazy is that Morton saw fit to give the Indians guns so that they could provide him with more furs. And they so were enraged by him that they sent their military officer, Miles Standish, to seize him, and they deported him to England.
Ah, Miles Standish. Now, Miles Standish, we all know about Miles, but he is described, I believe this is from one of the primary sources, Miles Standish, quote, a man of a very little stature, yet of a very hot and angry temper.
Yes.
Yeah, angry temper, excuse me. That's from one of the original sources.
Yes.
And there's another place where you describe how many inches had to be taken off the scabbard.
Right.
So he wouldn't trip over it.
Right. He had to shorten his sword by 6 inches. Otherwise, it would have dragged on the floor, on the ground. So, and Morton had the best laugh. He referred to Miles Standish as Captain Shrimp.
But again, in the sense of balance, he was a fighter and a killer.
Oh yeah, I mean, no one. He was short of stature, but no one ever said he was not courageous. But he also had an anger management problem. He would really blow up at people, and just before he went after Morton, he went after a Indian settlement just to the north of Plymouth called Wessagusset, where he led a virtual commando hit on a group of Indians and returned with the head of one of the warriors wrapped in a piece of white linen that was then planted on the fort in Plymouth where they worshipped every Sunday. And so, yes, there were 50 years of relatively peaceful coexistence in Plymouth Colony, but it was a peace...
Some exceptions.
Yes, with some exceptions.
Squanto, in a way, bears in his essence, in his being, the complexity of the story. He's an Indian. He knows both languages, so he's an interpreter. He's a messenger between Native Americans and the Pilgrims.
Oh,
and he dies rather tragically.
Yeah, well, he's caught in between. He's in that vortex between two cultures where, he can tell the Indians what he wants them to think the English are saying, and he can tell the English what he wants him to think the Indians are saying. And
a duplicitous sort.
Yeah, and he played this wonderfully for a year and was almost in the position to overtake Massasoit as leader of the Wampanoag. But his plot was revealed, and Massasoit was outraged, wanted him dead. Bradford, who was the governor and needed him as an interpreter, pled his case. Massasoit sort of calmed down, but soon after, Squanto died under very mysterious circumstances in Cape Cod. He may have been poisoned.
Well, he may have been poisoned, but I wrote in my notes that he died apparently of natural causes.
Right. Yes.
I guess I was trying to be nice or something.
Apparently
of natural causes.
This is before CSI Plymouth.
Well, that'll be coming.
Yeah, okay.
I suppose no discussion of Mayflower would be complete without getting into the Thanksgiving Day, the first one. We'll do that. And we'll also talk about King Philip and his war when we come back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
This is Jim Foster. It is Conversations on the Coast. Mayflower, A Story of Courage, Community, and War is the book. It's now in paperback. The author hasn't changed. It's still Nathaniel Philbrick, nor the publisher. Still Penguin Books, proudly carrying on. The LA Times, which used to have a book review, and I don't think has it anymore. The Los Angeles Times says in part, Philbrick triumphs in Mayflower because he combines hindsight with empathy to challenge twin myths about American beginnings. The original Pilgrims were neither religious patriots nor bloody conquerors, and the Native Americans they befriended, then betrayed, were more sophisticated and less peaceful than commonly believed. So there's no, white hat, black hat here. I mean, we all got gray hats, and which is really to get at the truth of the situation.
And for me, that was very important because I think, anyone who looks to the past as a repository of values that have escaped us is on a fool's quest. It was just like it is now. People didn't know what they were doing. They had all sorts of conflicting ambitions and motivations, and it was just a different time with humanity being the universal constant.
Let's get to this first Thanksgiving thing,
okay,
because people will be disappointed if we don't.
Yep.
I read the book. No tables, no tablecloths, no forks.
Right, no forks.
They had knives
fingers
in their hands,
yep,
and they stood around.
Right.
And the first Thanksgiving, you're right, marked the conclusion of a remarkable year. 11 months earlier, the Pilgrims had arrived at the tip of Cape Cod, fearful and uninformed. They had spent the next month alienating and angering every Native American they happened to come across. Just did a good job of that.
Yep.
By all rights, none of the Pilgrims should have emerged from the first winter alive. Like the French sailors before them, they all might have been either killed or taken captive by the Indians. That it had worked out differently was a testament not only to the Pilgrims' grit, resolve, and faith, but to their ability to take advantage of an extraordinary opportunity. Placing their faith in God, the Pilgrims might have insisted on a policy of arrogant isolationism, but by becoming an active part of the diplomatic process in southern New England, by sending Winslow and Hopkins to Sowams, by compensating the Nossets for the corn, and most important, by making clear their loyalty to the Massowit as at the hurly-burly in Nemasket, they had taken charge of their own destiny in the region. So what we talk about now is, we call that outreach, I guess.
Yes.
And which I still find totally incredible, because they were in lousy shape when they got here. They did not know the language nor the culture and so forth.
Oh, yeah.
Amazing.
Oh, it is. They had lost half their number during that first winter. They were barely alive as a community. And but for his own reasons, Massasoit decides it's in our best interest to form an alliance with this pitiful group of English people. And they could have still easily blown it, particularly given their past history in America. But they pulled it together. And I think you have to look to Edward Winslow, who was the first diplomat of Plymouth Colony, and Governor Bradford. They decided to take diplomacy as an active force rather than something that's passive. And they really treated the Indians as a people that were their equals when it came to,
and that's probably the key to the whole thing. And it's really the key to diplomacy in any time, in any era.
Absolutely. If you approach it as, we are the ones that, it's our pleasure that you serve, it's going to go in a bad direction. And that's what would happen in the future generations. But in that first group, that first generation, they both felt they needed each other for their cultural, if not literal, survival. And they both felt they owed each other a debt. And they didn't forget that lesson for the next 50 years. And, it was a lesson that it would have been nice if that had been passed on to the next generation.
But you see, the other piece of that, I guess, is the leadership. You had Bradford, and you had Winslow, and you had some others. And you can, I think, look at them and what they did and how they did it, and say they were filled with greatness.
Absolutely, and this is the important part of any story that involves history. It comes down to the individuals. It's not just faceless groups of social forces. It's individuals that make specific decisions that influence history. And you had Edward Winslow, who emerged as the foremost diplomat not only in America but in England. Cromwell, once the Civil War had erupted in England, would look to him as recognized that this guy was very good at this, and it made all the difference.
41 years after that first Thanksgiving, things are falling apart, and shortly thereafter, in 75, there begins something called King Philip's War.
Right.
That's a major part of the story of the Mayflower, and it's something you're going to have to check out yourselves. Now that it's in paperback, you do not have a cost objection.
I like your thinking. Yes.
Mayflower, the story of courage, community, and war, by Nathaniel Philbrick. That's today's book. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.